Thank you, Mr President. I commence by saying, I don't know where my wife is, but
She's heard it all before.
I'm sure she's coming, but my 7-month-old granddaughter is going to have a very serious operation tomorrow. And I dedicate this speech to her. I would also like to thank my wife Diane, who is somewhere, and the members of my family who have come here today, and all those people who are here who have supported me throughout my parliamentary career. There are too many of them to name, but they can be assured that they have my gratitude. Mr President, I'm tempted just to repeat what I said in the other place 4 years ago and just sit down. But I'm not going to do that. One should never give up an opportunity to place on record those matters that are important in this next term of government and are important to me. I want to start by saying that I'm a fierce advocate of freedom. This includes the freedom to make mistakes, the freedom to have a different worldview, and the freedom to share different, even disagreeable ideas. I reject the notion that it is the political elite who are the custodians of all our thoughts, our speech and our actions. I believe that all Australians ought to be entitled to their own opinions, that it is fine to disagree with the person standing next to you, and that we may hold our differences with civility, whether they be on matters of economy, education or religion. I echo the words of our Prime Minister, who said, "We must learn to disagree better." Mr President, free speech in this country is under attack like never before. Tragically, there are few remaining in public life who will stand up for it. The most recent state and federal elections, however, are indicative. It tells us that Australians will always reject the politics of division and envy. It tells us that there is a generation of quiet Australians who value their families, their jobs and their wonderful lifestyle that this country has to offer. It tells us that the average Australian asks for nothing more than that the government should get on with the job of delivering for the community and then get out of the way so families can get on with their lives. It is now clear, Mr President, that there is only one side of politics that represents these quiet Australians. It is the Liberal National Coalition that seeks to deliver better outcomes for all the people of this state. It is the coalition that is now the party of the worker. Workers do not want a government whose aim is to push policies on them that will tax them into poverty and then tell them how to live their lives. No, they desire a better future for themselves and their families, and they should expect to achieve just that through hard work and persistence. It is this side of the House that gets it, Mr President, and the Berejiklian government is one that I am proud to be part of. In our Premier, we have a leader who every single day puts the needs of the people of New South Wales first. The Premier has spelt out the 5 priorities of this next term of government, and I wish to take this opportunity of addressing each one of those priorities. Firstly, we are delivering a strong economy, quality jobs and financial security for the workers of today and tomorrow. This government has a great story to tell of responsible governance and strong economic management. We have a narrative that points to the lowest unemployment rates in the country and record spending on vital infrastructure, on our roads and public transport, on our hospitals and on our schools. We are employing more teachers, more doctors and nurses and more essential services. Since 2011, we have delivered over 500,000 jobs in New South Wales. Over the next 4 years, we're going to deliver 250,000 more. Our government has achieved this while keeping our expenses reined in, with predicted surpluses across the forward estimates. Our AAA credit rating is affirmed and we are in negative net debt. Operating expenses per capita are the lowest of the mainland states, and New South Wales now holds a net worth of $250 billion. Our almost $90 billion infrastructure program is driving this state forward. And the projects that this generation of government begins will be the infrastructure that the next generation of Australians will enjoy. We are creating jobs for today and careers for tomorrow. We are providing for the present, but also preparing for the future. We are proudly known, Mr President, as the jobs capital of Australia, and we are the engine room of this nation. I repeat, Mr President, we are the party of the worker. So, whether you're a shearer in Dubbo, or a shoppy at David Jones, or a nurse at RPA, or a tradie in Parramatta, this government has your back. Because unlike previous governments that have operated on platforms of dependency, this government operates on policies which are designed to create jobs and provide opportunity. And in my submission, Mr President, the greatest expression of dignity that we can guarantee individuals is to ensure that they have an opportunity to pursue a career, for we are dignified by our work. To be deprived of work, to be unable to provide for ourselves and those dearest to us, is not only to be financially vulnerable, Mr President, but it is mentally and emotionally crippling. I repeat what I said in my maiden speech in my capacity as the member for Epping. I quoted St John Paul II in his encyclical Laborum Exercens, where he said, "Work is a good thing for a man, a good thing for his humanity, because through work, man not only transforms nature, adapting it to his own needs, but he also achieves fulfilment as a human being, and indeed, in a sense, becomes more a human being." Mr President, ours is the government that pulled all the necessary economic levers. Ours is the government that took notional ideas and made them come alive. Ours is the government that took pipe dreams and actually took them to the pipeline. The Sydney Metro opened last Sunday, and it is a fine example of just this. It is a project which was promised no less than 4 times by the dreamers opposite, but was finally delivered by the doers on this side of the House. Ours is the government that ought to stand proud at the fact that we have restored this state to the premier position in the country and the envy of this nation. And so, Mr President, it should not come as a surprise that the good people of New South Wales would place their confidence in us for an historic third term of government. The second priority, Mr President, is to deliver the highest quality education no matter where you live or what your circumstances, and we are privileged to have the Minister for Education in this chamber. I do not know a single parent in New South Wales, nor in the whole of Australia, who does not desire the very best for their child. We as a government share this aspiration. We want to give every child the opportunities, the education and the skills that will give them the very best start in life. It is for these reasons that we have embarked on the largest school building revolution that this state has ever seen. This includes $6.5 billion commitment towards more than 190 new and upgraded schools, 22 of which were delivered before the first term started this year. $1.3 billion investment to wipe out the school maintenance backlogs for our government schools, and $500 million to provide cooler classrooms with air conditioning and ventilation systems for up to 1,000 schools across the state. But this government is rolling out education initiatives beyond bricks and mortar. We're investing in our teachers, our curriculums and our programs to provide better outcome for our children. We are talking about 4,600 new teachers over this term of government working in these schools with our children. We are talking about worthwhile initiatives like the Active Kids and Creative Kids programs so that our children can develop the skills, friendship groups and networks that will benefit them long into the future. Mr President, we are talking about a government that understands that a quality education will mean a more capable and flexible workforce, greater innovation, greater opportunities and jobs for the future. That is why the government has also invested $80 million towards the construction of a new mega TAFE in the heart of Western Sydney. That is why our government is providing 70,000 extra free courses for young job seekers and 30,000 places for mature-aged workers looking to re-enter the workforce. But while it is true, Mr President, that a child's educational environment is important, what is taught in the classroom and outside the classroom is just as important. It is my submission that parents are the primary educators of their children. The state must always recognise and support this rather than seek to usurp it. It is not the educator's role to promote a radical agenda of identity politics in the classroom. Our focus must be on arithmetic, history and literacy, not gender identity. In my capacity as the member for Epping...
Order. Look, can I welcome all members of the public who are here, of course, to hear the honourable member's maiden speech. But just as we have rules in the chamber, we ask that members of the public also abide by those rules. So I'd ask you not to applaud, not to interject, and simply await until the member has completed his speech, and then there'll be much opportunity outside in the foyer for the public to congratulate the honourable member on his speech. Thank you. The honourable member has the call.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you for your applause.
That did it all.
In my capacity as the member for Epping, I was proud to have introduced before the Legislative Assembly a petition of over 17,000 signatures from concerned parents in opposition to the ironically labelled Safe Schools program, which was introduced under the guise of an anti-bullying initiative. Allow me to be clear, Mr President, there is no room for bullying of any kind in our schools. But neither is there room for a program that encourages children to explore gender theory and promotes the sexualisation of young children. There is no room for any program that calls for students to cross-dress or calls for the introduction of unisex bathrooms in our schools. Mr President, we owe a debt to Rob Stokes, who, as Education Minister, committed to ensure the removal of the Safe Schools program. We also owe a debt to Dr Pansy Lai and the courageous work done by all those who gathered the 17,000 signatures for that petition. I will say again, Mr President, the state does not own our children. The values that make us who we are, our moral fibre, the things that we hold dear to us, whether they be the intrinsic dignity of the individual, freedom, respect for others and the law, hard work and equality between the sexes, these begin at home. In his first address to this place, the Honourable Mark Latham asked the following question: how are there so many voices who refuse to believe in the virtues and achievements of Western civilisation? He said, Western civilisation has brought us healthcare, education, architecture, engineering, philosophy, technology, freedom of speech, and a rule of law that no single individual is above, irrespective of their office. Nevertheless, he said, how has it come to such a serious state of decline? While agreeing with the observation by Mr Latham, in my submission, the answer is to be found largely in the systematic deprecation of the family unit. Only within a strong family unit is it possible for the bedrock of our Australian values to be properly nurtured in the lives of our children. I agree with Ronald Reagan, who captured the sentiment well. In raising and instructing our children, in providing personal and compassionate care for the elderly, in maintaining the spiritual strength of religious commitment among our people, in these and other ways, families make immeasurable contribution to a nation's well-being. Today, more than ever, it is essential that these contributions not be taken for granted and that each of us remember that the strength of our families is vital to the strength of our nation. The third priority, Mr President, outlined by the Premier is that this government will be delivering well-connected communities with quality environment. When the Coalition was elected in 2011, the government was faced with soaring housing demand and a total bankruptcy of infrastructure and debt. The message accepted by those opposite was that Sydney was full, and it sent the corresponding message that proper planning and infrastructure were not required. 10 years ago, New South Wales had no beeline bus service to Sydney's northern beaches, no effective light rail in either Sydney or Newcastle, and no metro rail connecting Sydney's booming northwest, west and southwest to the CBD. 10 years ago, there was no Opal card. Instead, we stood in long lines at the train station concourse waiting to buy tickets, and even longer at the Roads and Transport Authority to renew our licences. Now, housing and infrastructure in New South Wales has been and continues to be addressed, but at a cost. The speed and volume of construction has been disruptive to the community. Mr President, the Premier is right to call for a slowing of immigration rates because there is a need to allow infrastructure to catch up with demand. As it As it currently stands, the states bear the responsibility for providing the roads, schools and hospitals, but have no hand on the lever controlling immigration. In my submission, it seems appropriate that states ought to have a seat at the table when immigration targets are set by the Commonwealth. Mr President, with such significant changes in terms of immigration development and infrastructure in such a short period, it will inevitably lend itself towards a fracturing of community life. With this in mind, the Premier has embarked on a strategy to improve the quality of community life through greater attention to planning decisions and the delivery of open space. I would like to spend a moment just to dwell on the concept of well-connected communities, because it gives rise to issues well beyond the delivery of open space and more available parking, as important as those issues are. Recently, a friend of mine who does home maintenance for an elderly woman found the woman deceased at her home. She had been deceased for a week and no one knew. I recall in my years at university, and it's as far back as 1974, I attended a lecture at the university, and the lecturer observed that living rooms were once structured so that lounges and chairs faced one another, as people were expected to interact and engage in conversation. His lament was that they now faced the television instead. The breakdown which started in the family home is now endemic. Today it is no longer an uncommon sight to board a bus or a train only to have every face staring down at a small screen held in front of them. My son, in fact, recently pointed out to me that there is now a function on Uber whereby you're able to inform your driver that you would rather not be disturbed on your journey. It appears to me that one of life's bitter ironies is that while there is an increasing engagement and connectivity on platforms like social media and the internet, human interactions are on the decline. And today, many face terrible struggles with loneliness. Mr President, I would like to suggest that when we talk about well-connected communities, we do so in a way that seeks to address loneliness, which is becoming such a crippling health issue. We need to acknowledge that there are many people in our community who believe that no one cares about them. This is the age of loneliness. Indeed, so severe as an issue is loneliness in the United Kingdom that they have appointed a Minister for Loneliness. The Joe Cox Commission in the United Kingdom found that 9 million people, approximately 14% of the population, are often or always lonely. Vivek Murthy, the former United States Surgeon General, echoes these sentiments when he calls loneliness a health epidemic. Mr President, it would be naive of us to think that Australia is exempt. A 2016 Lifeline survey found that more than 80% of Australians believe society is becoming a lonelier place. One further small observation is that we have seen the proliferation of the single-bedroom apartment in Sydney, which in my view has contributed to or is emblematic of increasing levels of loneliness. But, Mr President, there is no silver bullet. I raise this issue because loneliness appears to play such a significant precursory role in respect of homelessness. Addressing homelessness is a priority of this government. Over $1 billion will be invested into homelessness services over the next 4 years. And I note the Premier earlier this year signed a global agreement to halve street loneliness across the state by 2025. Government, however, cannot achieve this alone. There must be a united, concerted effort from local communities, from non-government organisations and from all of us. To this end, we ought to invest in our volunteers. We need to see the value of each person and the time that each person freely gives to volunteer organisations, and we must never undervalue the work which is being done by our churches and charities. Already more than 2.1 million people volunteer across the state each year, contributing a combined 240 million hours. Fantastic. We as a government ought to be looking for further ways where we can encourage more people to get involved, making New South Wales a better and more connected place. Governments around the world are consistently looking at ways to improve taxation systems, to ensure efficiency and promote fairness. It is my submission that here in New South Wales we ought to consider ways where our taxation system encourages more volunteering in our communities. We should consider how small and medium businesses can play a role in encouraging more volunteering. I am of the view both businesses will benefit from increased goodwill and our communities will benefit from increased tangible social capital. It is fitting I raise this matter today, Mr President, as last week was National Volunteer Week, which recognises and celebrates volunteers and the important work they do, and I acknowledge the work done by the husband of Bronnie Taylor. I commend the Premier on celebrating volunteers across our community. Fourthly, this is a government that at its core is radically customer-centred. Mr President, the Premier has made it abundantly clear to this government that the reason that we are here is to put the people of New South Wales at the centre of everything we do. It came as no surprise that the earnest, hard-working and digitally savvy Victor Dominello was appointed as the very first Minister for Customer Service. We have already made great steps in demonstrating that commitment to the people of New South Wales, and the one-stop service New South Wales officers are iconic in that regard. They facilitate the processing of transactions with government and provide advice to reduce the cost of living and have been a resounding success. Mr President, I have been honoured to be appointed the Minister for Finance and Small Business in the Berejiklian and Barilaro government. Victor has and will be putting the customer at the centre of everything that he does. In very much the same way, so will I make every endeavour to put small businesses front and centre of what we do as a government. Mr President, behind every business there is a family. Behind every small business are employees, and behind every small business is a community that is dependent upon it for their services. I say this, Mr President, because I myself was once a small business owner. I know firsthand the difficulties they face on a daily basis, the pressures it puts on families when cash flow is tight, when bills need paying and school fees are due. I know what it's like to put your house on the line, to be buried in mountains of paperwork, to have long hours and sleepless nights. I'm not saying that it is the role of government to ensure that every business succeeds, but what I am saying, however, is that it is incumbent on government to make it as easy as possible for them to do business and to foster an environment that will allow them to grow and succeed. While there is always more work to do, we as a government are committed to the following principles, Mr President: reducing red tape, connecting small businesses with expert advice, creating networking opportunities for small businesses to work collaboratively, building our economy and growing confidence and investment, and ultimately nurturing the entrepreneurial spirit which has become so characteristic of Australians. Finally, and I'm sure everyone will be happy to hear me use that word, this government is committed to breaking the cycle of intergenerational disadvantage by fixing the problems that have traditionally been thrown into the too hard basket. Mr President, it is my submission that we are all here to leave a better New South Wales for the next generation than the one we find ourselves in. There are a number of areas where there are entrenched social issues, including Indigenous health and education, high recidivism rates, the number of children in out-of-home care, and treatment of the elderly and the vulnerable. I want to pay tribute to the retired Minister for Family and Community Services for the remarkable job she did in the last Parliament to reduce the number of children in out-of-home care who would be shuttled from one foster family to the next. It was her vision to seek a solution by facilitating permanent placements. The passing of the Children and Young Persons Care and Protections Amendment Act last year is a tribute to her, and is a matter of some shame that it was not supported by those opposite. Already, the newly appointed Minister for Community Services, Gareth Ward, has recently introduced a bill to create the first independent Ageing and Disability Commissioner to shine a light on abuse, neglect or exploitation of the elderly and vulnerable in our communities, and I commend that initiative. I would like, however, to raise just a few other issues which have traditionally been deemed too difficult. One of the largest epidemics we face as a society, particularly in our regional centres, is the increased use of crystal methamphetamine, or the drug more commonly known as ice. I was pleased to hear the Premier announce last year a special commission of inquiry into the use of this drug in New South Wales. The question for the inquiry is, how do we as a government treat the problem? It is my view that government cannot, by its passivity, allow more users to simply fall by the wayside of a misguided solution to the problem of drug addiction. only a strong message of deterrence and rehabilitation programs designed to help those addicted will prevail. The problem of ice certainly is related to a wider issue of drug addiction that includes the use of gateway drugs such as ecstasy at music festivals. There is a small percentage of the population who would suggest that drug testing is a possible solution. The evidence, however, does not stack up. I agree with the findings of a research report published by the National Addiction Centre at King's College London, which found that pill testing of any description does not guarantee safety or protect the consumer against individual responses to pills. At best, it gives an artificial shine of safety to a group of diverse drugs that remain both illicit and potentially harmful. Mr President, there is one final issue that I would like to raise. Lest there be any doubt, I am fiercely pro-life. I join with Thomas Jefferson, who said, "The care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government." It is my strong view that we have become far too comfortable with speaking of human life critically, as noxious to the environment, or taxing upon the economy, or straining upon our relationships, or burdensome to the wider population. I believe that all life, whether at its dawn or dusk, is good and brimming with latent potential. We all can empathise with the circumstances of those who have suffered tremendously at the closing hours with their loved ones. Indeed, who wouldn't? It would be an exceptional case to find anyone whose hearts are not stirred by such unhappy circumstances. But compassion itself cannot and will never be an ultimate solution. It is seldom wise to make decisions based purely on emotions. As parliamentarians, we must also look at the potential consequences of the decisions we strive to undertake. Mr President, when a human life begins, to hold to an unshakable conviction that that life should go well, that the investments and aspirations attached to that life represent the hopes and dreams to be realised, rather than frustrated. Should such a position change for a person, whether at the dawn or twilight of their lives? Could it be that the so-called plea for death with dignity might be better interpreted as a plea for better care, support and comfort? Mr President, in the 2017-18 budget, the Treasurer announced a $100 million funding package for palliative care across New South Wales. This package included training for 300 nurses, 300 scholarships for rural and regional staff to enhance their palliative care skills, and 30 additional nurses in hospitals, homes and nursing homes. Additionally, the Premier has made a further commitment of $45 million towards the delivery of 100 additional palliative care nurses to ensure patients can access the care they need in the setting that they choose. These are all initiatives I am proud that this government has undertaken, for there are few things worth fighting for more than to protect life and to uphold its intrinsic value. Mr President, at the risk of torturing the language, this was not my first inaugural speech. As I said earlier, it is my honour and privilege to be given the capacity to stand here and deliver another one. I thank my colleagues in this place and all in the public gallery for their courtesy in listening to me. In closing, Mr President, I am of the strong view that the future is bright for New South Wales and for the aspirational, hard-working families of this great state. But there is more work to do. I look forward to contributing in some small part to the success of the Berejiklian and Barilaro government.